Hey, Mario.
All right, you are on.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us virtually here for the NRASP monthly meeting. My name is Chuck Ulrich. I'm with Essentia Health Occupational Medicine, and I serve as the president of the board of directors for this fine organization. And we've got some good information here today that these two fine gentlemen are going to share with us. So before we get started, though, I have a few announcements that I just want to pass on to the group. And I know if you haven't already, you'll be receiving your gift card for the free lunch. And these announcements will also be enclosed in a letter format with that gift card. So virtual meetings. At this point, we're going to continue to offer these meetings virtually on the third Wednesday of each month from 11 to 12 until our local health departments and the CDC give us the go-ahead to get back together in large groups. So keep watching for information on that, and we'll continue on in this format. The community outreach. Our first plan was this year to have a panel of individuals that our membership could attend. But given the situation with COVID, we are kind of pushing that back, and we are going to offer the three $1,000 scholarships to area students and or members who are looking to further their education in the safety and or health field. So you can find more information at the NRASP website. You go to nrasp.org /scholarship/CONT-education. So golf. Everybody has been asking about the golf tournament, and the annual golf event is scheduled for Tuesday, September 22nd at Village Green in Moorhead. So we're planning on an 18-hole event with a tentative shotgun start at noon, depending on the total number of golfers registered, of course. We want to note that anyone who rides in the same vehicle to the golf course can then ride in the same golf cart. So there'll be more information coming out to the membership as that time approaches. So from the communications committee, we want to remind you to check out NRASP on Facebook and LinkedIn. We are posting reminders of the meetings and upcoming events on the NRASP Facebook and the NRASP LinkedIn sites. So we want to encourage our members to check those pages out and share the information with on your pages as well, so that we can get that spread going and get our message out to as many people as possible. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact any of us board members with any concerns or suggestions regarding your membership and these types of events. So we want to make sure that we maintain that open communication during this time when we're all in different locations trying to come together in one group. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan and Mario, and we'll get going with the seminar. So Dan, Mario, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chuck, and thanks to the group for allowing us to visit here today about cyber. I think you're going to find that both Mario and I are fairly passionate about it, so we like the opportunity to talk about it, so thank you. Just quickly as an introduction, name is Dan Hansen, Senior Vice President of Management Liability within Marsh McLennan Agency. Lead a team of people that specialize in D&O, E&O, cyber liability insurance. Date myself, I've been in the industry for 26 years and specialize in these lines of insurance, and I guess I still enjoy it, so that's a good thing. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mario.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you to all the folks that are attending the call. We really do appreciate it. My name is Mario Paez. I'm the Director of Cyber and Technology E&O Insurance, part of Marsh McLennan Agency. Similar to Dan, over 20 years of experience, all within professional liability, cyber, network security, privacy liability, and insurance coverages. And certainly there's been a lot of evolution in the marketplace in this exposure. And we're going to try to connect it into your world as safety professionals, which is a very broad, encompassing type of role, I'm sure. So we we're certainly passionate about it. We'll open to any questions that you may have as we move forward. So again, thank you, and look forward to this conversation.
Okay, before we get underway, I'm going to take care of a couple housekeeping items here. First off, Mario and these are our views. I think Marsh McLean agents would back us on our views, but we're alone on this one right now. So these are our views. Neither of us are attorneys or licensed attorneys. So what we're presenting today is for your information only, and give us calls or reach out to us after if there's anything we can help clarify for you. So cyber risk, I think, this has been a subject that has been out there for a number of years, obviously. Computers aren't new, information certainly isn't new, but we keep talking about it. And, I think the reason is it continues to grow. We're going to show you some statistics here in a little while. 2019 was a great year to be a cyber criminal. There was a lot of activity in the space, a lot of new schemes that came out. Demands were going up as far as ransom, things like that. And 2020, to state the obvious, has only been better. The COVID environment, many of us working from home, have certainly amplified our threat vectors and amplified the opportunities for that cyber criminal to go and attack our organizations and get some valuable data out. So what we want to do today is kind of talk through a few things. First, we might scare you a little bit, but give you some cyber risk statistics, what we're seeing out there. And then why your organizations you're charged to protect may be targets. What are some emerging threat trends we're seeing? We want to talk pretty heavily about some risk management techniques that we think are effective. And then we want to also talk about what to do once an event has occurred, and then also how maybe insurance could help out there. And hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. Like Mario said, we want to talk about what you want to talk about. So we have some slides prepared, but if you have questions or if we're heading down a path that maybe isn't helpful to you, feel free to reach out via chat, Q&A, speak up on the call here. Give us the questions that are important to you and to the group, because we'll just make the promise we'll try to answer, and if we can't answer, we'll tell you that. We might be out of our scope. And just one final thing as we tee this up is, as you think about risk and you think about protecting organizations, cyber crime is a crime of opportunity, meaning that the cyber criminal, they're a criminal for maybe one reason. They're criminals. They're not maybe the most energetic person in the world, right? They're going to go to where it's easiest to go. So you don't have to be perfect. It's helpful to be perfect, but I haven't seen a company yet that's been perfect, or an organization yet that's been perfect from a cyber protection perspective. But it's very helpful to not be the worst, because what we see is when people aren't thinking about this, aren't seeing the exposure, aren't anticipating exposure, that's when we really have trouble. So our goal here is to make folks the best of the best as far as cyber crime, and hopefully we'll give you some tips here today to get there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mario to go through some maybe what I'll say is some horrifying statistics.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And just another introductory type of comment I'll add, just obviously from a safety professional standpoint, if you have slips and falls within your properties, what have you, how do we connect that to information risk, to network security risk and security? We're going to try to connect those dots, but again, that is something where allowing a threat actor, a criminal, into your network, how that could disrupt the overall operations, lead to some slips and falls, for that matter, to some property damage, bodily injury. So we'll get into some of those comments on the insurance coverage piece, but again, that's where there's really no end in sight in terms of what criminals are trying to cause damage to, whether that's reputational loss or even physical damage, bodily injury, to try to extort folks, what have you. So again, I think just wanted to make that quick comment as we move forward. Here are some of the pretty alarming stats. And so, with the FBI and U.S. Secret Service issuing alerts for growing threats on business email compromise, malicious email attacks, that's pretty alarming. This came really just a few weeks after lockdown in several states. We certainly have seen the uptick in coronavirus phishing email attacks. As you can see, 600% 46% there. And then also ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks often are conducted via phishing attacks. So that's just for folks who may already know what those are. I apologize to be too elementary here, but that's essentially those types of malicious emails where we'll click on a link. It looks like it's legitimate, but that downloads some malware. And that ransomware, that threat actor, if you will allow the spread of malware. Perhaps they'll navigate within a network and do some mapping so that they can later encrypt the system and extort the organization. And with that, we've seen the extortion demands, the ransom demands, as you can see, continually increase into the multi-million-dollar type of range. The average that you can see kind of on the fifth bullet point there, because of a 33% increase from Q4 2019 to first quarter 2020 is 111,000. So that's nothing to scoff at in just the payment, the ransom demand payment in and of itself. Again, another quick point I mentioned is the majority of small, middle-sized businesses, 83%, say they feel prepared for a ransomware attack. That's pretty good. But when they say if they have encountered a ransomware attack, 46% of them have, the majority of them, 73%, end up paying the ransom demand. So that may be a little bit of a disconnect there because there may not be as much preparation as organizations may think to be able to restore from backups, to be able to remove that threat actor and that malware from their system, to eliminate any backdoor. So again, just a little bit of a different thought there, perhaps in that InfraScale survey. You can see some pretty alarming attacks with cloud-based cyber attacks. A lot of this is coming through emails. And a lot of us a lot of us organizations will use a Microsoft or other cloud-based email system. And a 630% increase is pretty alarming just from January to April 2020. And then I'll just touch on some of the billions of records that have been exposed and a 273% increase in the first quarter, alone. So that's pretty alarming year over year. And a lot of this is driven by the work from home. And not to get too technical on this, but obviously a lot of these threats were existing even before COVID. Vulnerabilities with remote desktop works, with home networks. That's just a proliferation of the environment that these threat actors, these criminals can access. Just yesterday, I'll just use this as a reference. Yesterday, we got a question that someone said, well, I'm logging in through my home network, but it's through a virtual private network through their employer. That's great. Their question was, well, if I'm using my VPN, my virtual private network, is that protecting all my other devices within my home? And the quick answer, that, without getting too technical, is that no, that home network is allowing for the internet access to allow you to connect to the internet, but those other devices still have some vulnerabilities, and there is potential for that to spread even into your system. And we have seen some losses and claims because of the infiltration of home networks. So again, I chalk that up to why these statistics are so alarming and increasing ever more. And then finally, that last bullet point, just speaking on the estimated probability of a successful breach for organizations in the US at 45%. This is pretty consistent across all industry classes and sizes of organizations too. So we'll get into some of those preventative measures as we move forward to try to help your organizations prevent the entry of malware and threat actors. Then I'll just touch on a couple quick slides here on some additional statistics. This quick slide is on actual paid cyber insurance losses. So leading cyber insurance carriers will report their losses. I think the other alarming piece here, as I mentioned on ransomware at 150,000, this is for businesses under 2 billion in revenue, is what they consider small. So that's a pretty wide range, but resulting in 96% of claims reported. And then also social engineering. This is another consistently high loss area where organizations may receive fraudulent instructions to transfer funds to a third party. And lo and behold, that was just a fictitious email and the funds are out of the organization. So again, these are pretty alarming stats depending, regardless of the size of the organization. Once we move into the next slide of 2 billion and larger type organizations, you can see these numbers just increase that much more. So again, we know there's a pretty wide, diverse group of industry classes and size of businesses on this call. So we just want to be respectful and share some quick stats from this survey. And again, I think Dan can speak to this one too. It's pretty alarming.
Yeah, I was just going to comment quickly here on the next couple of slides. So you can see, you know, I think sometimes we hear the big claims, right? We hear the Target claims, or we hear Home Depot, or we hear, you know, a large health system that had a breach. And, you know, I think what people miss maybe is that this is a small business issue. And, you know, in fact, digging into the Target breach a little bit, many of you probably heard the story. It's a little old, but Target, their breach started with a $14 million CVAC contract out of Pennsylvania, who had access to, you know, was able to get into the Target system and take them down, you know, right during the holiday period. You know, I used to say, like, Greg Steinhoffel, the CEO of Target at that time, was probably the most secure man in a job in the U.S., right? Great company, been there for years, grew up, was all the way through it. Within a year, he was out of a job, right? Because they took their eye off the switch, or had some people took the eye off the switch. So, and that's it's a small company. It's a small company issue, because that's sometimes where you know, that's the easy place to infiltrate and get to the larger pies. So you can see 72% of cyber attacks affect company with less than 100 employees. Again, crime of opportunity. Let's go there, see what we can get, and if we get some big keys to the right organization, that's great. The other thing is, you know, as Mario kind of alluded to earlier, but 50% of small business think they're too small to be hacked. So, you know, that's too bad, because everybody's vulnerable to be hacked. And then you can see there's not an insignificant cost associated with 188K. You know, there's a stat that goes around that, you know, if you have a significant hack, and you don't control it right, you know, within 6 months, 60% of those small businesses are out of business. And I've seen that from a couple different sources. So it's a real exposure to our companies with smaller size. Just quickly on the next slide here, I want to touch on, we've done some research on this, as you would, to understand what our customers are thinking. And you know, we can see our clients know this exposure. They know, when considering the executives responding to cyber risk, report 82% expect an increase in the risk of cyber attacks that lead to theft of money, and 80% expect an increase in cyber risk to disrupt their business operations. They know it's a risk. They don't always know how to quantify or mitigate the risk. And I use the analogy, you build a building and it costs $2 million to build, right? You go out and you insure that building for $2 million. The bank's requiring you to insure it for $2 million. It's a pretty highly regulated and pretty concrete thing to do. Cyber risk is much more challenging. What is our cyber risk? How much information do we have? What's the value of that information? How do we quantify that? At what point do we, you know, have we bought enough insurance? Have we not bought enough insurance? And those are all great questions. They make Mario and I stay up at night, I think, thinking about that. But that's, you know, that's really, that's the big challenge here. It's very intangible, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in the future here on this talk. But there's also different levels of knowledge within an organization. The CFO and the CEO are pretty confident. They build a $2 million building. They know what they want to insure that for. They know what they're required to insure it for. With cyber risk, you probably have the CFO or the risk manager, who's they're the economic buyer. You've got the CEO, who maybe doesn't know a whole lot about the IT systems. They know enough, but they don't know enough about how to quantify the value there, the intangible value. And then you have the IT person, who probably knows a lot about the IT security and the IT safety, but they don't know, again, how to quantify that value. So you've got three different parties that maybe don't always communicate the best. Maybe they do. And I've been in situations where it's really good and really bad, but it's a more challenging concept to understand. So, you know, our hope here is to kind of give you some information to better understand and quantify this exposure, and help you arrive at some conclusions. So that'll pass it back to Mario.
Great, thanks, Dan. And again, just given the wide array of industry classes on the call, we just thought we'd throw out another quick highlight of industry classes and what the Ponymon IBM cost of a data breach survey speaks to. So you can look at your respective industry classes. If you don't find it on the screen here, we can certainly dive down deeper after after this call, but you can see just for one, manufacturing construction at the bottom there, overall industrial at 5.2 million. I think that's pretty alarming. And I'll also touch on just the 220 days to identify the breach and 82 days to contain it. That may be kind of eye-opening because a lot of times organizations don't know that there's been an infiltration until that threat actor, that criminal has really navigated out and mapped your network. That's kind of a scary position to be in. And there's different preventative measures, of course, that we'll touch on, but wanted to at least highlight this as another study for industry classes.
Yeah. And Mario, just quickly for the audience, I like numbers. I'm guessing a few folks on the line here like numbers. There might be a little bit of change between these numbers and what we saw earlier. Can you just kind of share what your view would be on that?
Sure. No, that's a great question. The net diligence study that I referenced earlier is just the paid loss from cyber insurance carriers. And as coverage has evolved and become broader, more and more parts of a cyber event loss are being covered. So we continually see the increase in the net diligence study, those costs increase to become more in line with this Pony-Mon IBM cost of a data breach, because things that may not be factored in there, overtime losses paid to employees, consequential reputational loss, basically customer churn, that typically is not covered in historical cyber insurance policies. Now they are. And so those numbers are catching up and to be more holistic in nature with these types of Pony-Mon IBM surveys. So thanks for that question.
Okay, thank you. So next we want to talk about why your organization might be a target. Yeah, thanks for populating this slide. Too fancy for me. First, just backing up here. Your organizations or organizations you have to protect have an obligation to protect the confidential information of others. And that's really tough to quantify what that may mean, because it means different things to different people, right? I think, if we were having this conversation 15 years ago, people would be talking about driver's license numbers, they'd be talking about social security numbers, they'd be talking about credit card numbers. And, fortunately or unfortunately, they're out there. There's very little value associated with that bit of information anymore. Like took a seminar last year, and the speaker, and I've heard this a couple times since, but they asked, what do you think your social security number is worth on the in the dark web right now? And people were throwing out big numbers, and I won't put you through the pages here since we're virtual, but it's about 10 cents. That's what your social security number is worth right now. Ask the same question about credit card numbers. And, we had a bunch of outlandish guesses, and it was a quarter. And then they asked, what is the healthcare record worth? And people have been trained by that point, right? So they're like $1 or $2, whatever it may be. And they're like, no, actually up to $1,000. And the reason is because the cyber criminals advanced, right? Instead of just gathering information now they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I monetize this thing? One way to monetize is ransomware, which we've alluded to already, but we'll probably talk to a little bit more here in the future. But, holding that information, extorting you for your information for money or Bitcoin until you pay it and then give your records back. But a healthcare record you can monetize right away. You think about, Medicare fraud, healthcare fraud. There's several different ways to monetize a healthcare record. So you really have to broaden your mind about what information is valuable to others. So put some things on here, intellectual property, like your plans, processes, people, clients. That brings real value to the cyber criminal when utilized correctly. And it certainly brings value from a ransom perspective, from a PR perspective. Without saying too much, we have a fairly nasty ransomware event going on right now, and this company, Fortune 50 companies are their clients. It's a smaller company, but Fortune 50 companies are their clients, and these clients are reaching out right now and saying, "Hey, what are you going to do? We know that your information's been compromised. What are you going to do? We're going to stop selling your product until you tell us what you're going to do." That causes a lot of heartburn. So, obviously there's some value there. I already talked about protected healthcare information, driver's license numbers, they still bring some value. Financial information, depending on how it's used, obviously could cause some issues. we talked about access to credentials, you know, IDs and passwords. You know, I'm going to pick on my kids here. I was talking to one of my sons the other night, and he said, I use the same password for everything because then I won't forget, right? I'm like, well, hey, that's great, but you know, when I'm back in the office every day, that's what I'm talking about. We shouldn't be doing that. And he's like, well, most of the stuff, you know, it's accounts. There's no credit card linked to or anything else. I'm like, yeah, but what that criminal's going to go into that account, find that password, know your username, and then they're going to go into things that bring more value, like a banking account, or, you know, he's 14, right? So you got to put it all, it's all relative, right? But there's, you know, they're going to go into an account that does have some value, or does, you know, maybe has some healthcare records, or maybe it's the employee census or something like that. And they're going to be able to extract that information. So they're building out a profile on you. So these little bits of information, while seemingly innocuous on their own, can build a profile which can cause you or your organization harm. And then the final thing I just want to touch on, I guess I touched on the census, but your vendors and your clients. We talked about Target earlier, but access through you know, we've seen a lot of like invoice manipulation claims where they know enough about you to go to your vendors, your clients, and manipulate them out of funds, wiring funds seemingly to you, when actually they're wiring funds to the bad actors that maybe are sitting overseas. So there's all kinds of information that are at risk within your organization. So why are organizations a target? I can go, and I just went on forever, so I'm going to try not to go on forever here. But there's so many things. You know, you think about your businesses, many interrelated systems. We were talking to Chuck earlier. We have 110 offices across the U.S., and they've all been built through acquisition. Our systems don't talk together very well. We have worked very, very hard to get under one computer system to mitigate that risk, and it's been a lot of money. But that, you know, that was something that we had to do organizationally because we had all these different systems that were not connected. Right now, especially, this is amplified, but people take work home, and they might take it home, or they might email it to the home network. And when the home network is not nearly as secure as the work network, as Mario has already touched on, bad software patches, or maybe we're not updating patches. I know personally it's harder to update the patches in the home environment. It doesn't go as fast. When I'm in the office, you know, I can get it done in 15 minutes. I had my computer running all last night, and it just kind of finished up this morning to get it done. I had to leave my computer on overnight to get the latest software patch updated. Outsourcing to an IT service, you know, that can be really good or it can be really bad depending on who you're outsourcing to and their level of knowledge. Rogue employees, still probably 30% of the cases involve employees of some sort. Most are well-meaning, they just click the wrong button, but occasionally we see the issue where a rogue employee maybe left the company, or they're in process of leaving the company, or maybe they're not leaving, but they still don't like the company. And they, you know, somebody reaches out to them, a bad actor, or maybe they do it on their own, but says, hey, could you just, you know, implant this malware? Could you click this link? Or could you send me the employee census, whatever it may be? And, you know, that causes an exposure to your business. And then the final thing is resource scarcity. I have not once, and I've been in the business for 26 years, talked to an organization. They said, yeah, we've got too many resources. We don't know what to do with all this extra money, right? And unfortunately or fortunately, IT sometimes, or that data security infrastructure is one of the last to get the updates in the budget, because again, people just don't understand it and maybe understand the exposure to the business. So just not having the right tools in place that protect the organization, people and services to protect the organization can be a reason why you're a target to that cyber criminal.
Great, thanks, Dan. There's a lot of references to some of the emerging trends that we're seeing, obviously under COVID-19, work from home. This is an interesting slide that just touches on a lot of privacy concerns as well. We spoke a lot about security, but certainly from a privacy perspective, a regulatory perspective, you may have heard of General Data Protection Regulation out of the European Union. You may have heard of the California Consumer Privacy Act out of California, of course. But we're seeing a host of other states update their breach notification laws and then expand them to include other duties that organizations must adhere to around collection, around retention of sensitive data. And again, all of us have employees, so that's a concern. How are we safeguarding that information? Maybe we're using a third party, an ADP, other benefits provider with that information. How are they, from a contractual standpoint, going to coordinate with you? And so under these laws, there's a higher standard to protect that information and have the ability to remove sensitive information if it's no longer relevant. And I think Dan had a good comment on that, on some historical data that was retained with a vendor, and I'll let him speak to that. I think that's pretty relevant. Dan, if I don't mind putting you on the spot on that example.
Yeah, I think what we find is that, people keep records around too long. You keep physical records around too long. You think about file cabinets maybe in the basement or wherever it may be of your organization where, it's down there and it's a record. And that's, you think about data on your computer, your hard drives, that it exponentially gets larger, and that's an exposure to your organization. So, records retention is a real key to reducing the exposure to your organization. And a rigor and a process around that can be very helpful as you think about how to protect your organization in this environment.
Yeah, great. And one last thing, just Internet of Things, IoT, if you folks are familiar with that, we probably from a consumer level understand that as, you're having your refrigerator connected to the internet, or having Alexa or something that's playing music for you that's connected to the internet. One thing to be mindful of, certainly under COVID-19, is that those devices, such as an Alexa, they're listening to the surrounding environment within your home constantly. There's certain configurations that you can have with those devices, but from an eavesdropping perspective, what are they listening to? Sensitive information that's being discussed on a work-related basis. Just something to be concerned about there as well. So again, just an expansion of bringing your work home does bring in some additional privacy concerns too. So again, just wanted to mention a few of the highlights of the emerging trends from a regulatory perspective as well as technology-based.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about preventive measures, and I'll just take a pause here for a second with two things. One, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. We can see the chat or the Q&A thing, so please send them in or just speak up. And the second thing is just a reminder, our goal here is not to solve. Just like in any risk management situation, we are not going to create pig iron underwater here. Our goal is to make this more challenging and to mitigate the exposure of the organization. So just some tips, and I'm not going to run through all these, but Mario touched on VPN earlier and the importance there and how that can help protect the organization. So the understanding that multi-factor authentication across critical systems. If you make it that one password is challenging, two passwords or two triggers across multiple mediums. You plug in your password and then you get a text back and you have to put in a code. Makes it much more challenging for that cyber criminal. And Mario, you had a stat yesterday that I'd like if you could share that with the crew.
Yes, that was pretty alarming. But basically, the stat was that multi-factor authentication is significantly underdeployed by small, medium-sized enterprises at only 18% versus very large organizations at 43%, which is also still alarming. But that just means that there's not a lot of folks from an email perspective, from accessing critical systems, HR files, where, again, you have to add in 2 levels of authentication in order to access those systems. So again, that just came off of a recent report as well. So we hope those numbers will increase. Let's move forward.
Thank you. Backups. When we hear ransomware demands, you diminish the effect of a ransomware demand greatly if you have good backups and the regular backups, meaning that if that cyber criminal says, hey, I need $5 million to restore your data, and you've got data that was backed up on Friday night and it's Tuesday morning and it's air gapped and you can just go and recreate stuff back to Friday night, you can say, okay, thanks, but no thanks. I'm good to go, and get forensics in there, make sure they're out of your system, and roll forward, right? If you have not backed up or you do not have solid backups with, that's encrypted and you can get to and reestablish your systems, then that ransom demand becomes very real, right? And you probably have to work with them and get their encryption keys and get back to business. So good backups and test those backups and the system resiliency is very key. We talked about, understanding your digital assets, doing good data retention processes and getting rid of data, but I can't stress that enough. Number 7 in my heart is number 1, consistent employee awareness training. With so many times you pick these things up and what happened and somebody clicked the wrong attachment or responded to the wrong email or picked up the wrong phone call and gave information. And, it's not always the low person on the food chain either. We've had many instances where I'm on a phone call and it's the CFO or the general counsel and we're talking through it and there's just something missing. I'm like, what happened? Well, it was our CEO or it was our, so that makes it especially awkward. So it's just awareness training for everyone. No one's above this, no one's below this. This is an issue. And we see that good employee awareness training nips these things in the bud very, very effectively. And then just the verifying or having a process or verifying requests for information, 2 modes of communication. If somebody, sends you an email, changing wiring instructions of money or asking for an employee census, and it seems like it's good or, that it makes sense, having a way to, send them a text back or give them a call back and making sure that they indeed want to release this very valuable information back to them, right? It's the very common scheme. I'm sure you all seen it. CEOs, traveling or on vacation and sends an email and says, hey, I need to see all the W-2s for the employees immediately. Well, why would the CEO want to see W-2s? I don't know. But, the person, well, shoot, the CEOs relied on me. They're on vacation. I must be important. They send all the W-2s and then, it's gone to a bad actor. So just awareness training and then verifying this request can be very, can put out a lot of fires very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll touch on a few more. And again, I appreciate that not everybody on the line is an information security expert or IT individual. But again, you can always bring these back to your organizations to kind of check the box and see if these preventative measures are being deployed. But again, we'd just be remiss if we didn't touch on some of these, especially given some of the alarming stats. Encryption is key around sensitive data whenever possible, encryption of backups as well. Having those written procedures in place and making sure that they're updated. We'll touch on an incident response plan here momentarily, but that's really key, and that connects to item 13 here as well. But I do want to touch on 10 real quick because this obviously has some relevance to safety professionals around contact tracing, scanning of business invitees, how that return to the office, return to your workplace may look like. Various industries are going to have different approaches on this. But obviously this can raise some privacy issues around what type of information is being collected, how long it's being retained, and who it's being shared with. That's an important one because you may have different thermal scanning technologies or do temperature checks. And again, that's just another area of potential exposure when conducting this type of your operation on a physical premises standpoint. So again, that could be an hour-long conversation in and of itself, but we'd be remiss not to touch on some of that under COVID. Scheduling a third-party assessment and vulnerability of scanning your network. This is typical cyber hygiene that we recommend it, but it's always good to have that second set of eyes to do those types of scans on your environment from an external standpoint and an internal perspective as well. Dan alluded to updated patching of system software. There's a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities out there. What that means is that there's just immediate discovering of software gaps and holes that can open up the door for these threat actors. So making sure that the timing of these patches is done in a very quick, responsive, diligent manner in a test environment first, and then moving forward in a quick manner. So a lot of times your MSP, a managed service provider, if you outsource your IT services to a third party, this is one key area to ask that question about what their policy is around this, because that certainly can be an entry point for them, and then therefore into your system and what you may be responsible for. Ready your incident response plan. I alluded to this, and we'll touch on this in a little bit more detail, but that's key. Just making sure, who do you call if there is a system-wide shutdown, if there is a ransomware incident? You saw the stat earlier, about 46% of organizations should be expecting to experience some type of a cyber event in the future. That's more likely than, knock on wood, a fire or a tornado or what have you, some other natural disaster. So preparedness is key around this. And I hate the cliche, it's not if but when, but it is still very relevant here. So just knowing how your incident response is going to work, especially on a remote basis, which is even more tricky. And if your organization does purchase cyber insurance, just making sure that you know what that 24/7 hotline looks like, and whether or not your coverage limits are appropriate, your coverage is comprehensive enough. So I'll leave it at that for now. Network segmentation is key, just so that you don't have your HR files also on the same network as your, let's say your industrial control systems, if you're a manufacturer, and having some segmentation so that if a threat actor spreads across, that there is at least some type of firewall, some segmentation between those systems. And then contractual controls and audit. Dan will speak to that as well here on the next slide as we move forward. Dan.
Okay. Yeah, just touching quickly on this, I kind of see this as like the handrails or the sprinklers, if you will, from a fire, from a protection for the organization, is the contractual controls. And quite often, we meet with a lot of clients, and we'll talk all about the cybersecurity and the firewalls and what they have in place, and then say, okay, what do your contracts say? And we get blank stares. And just want to make people aware of this. If you're outsourcing to a third party, it doesn't matter if it's, you've outsourced, your client's not going to care. Your organization's clients aren't going to care. They're going to see that as you losing that information. So if that third party has an issue or has a breach or whatever it may be, you want them to notify you as soon as possible. So, timing of notes back to your organization. Somebody asked me, what would you put there? I'm not an attorney, as I clarified earlier, but, something like as soon as practical, but not to exceed, X amount of days, or, something like that, I think would be what you want, but I would consult with attorneys on that. Also, what's the financial backing? You go and lease office space in a building, people are going to, you're going to get a certificate of insurance showing that building's insured. You're going to have, loss of income. You're going to have all this other stuff on certificates of insurance. You send all your intangible data off to a third party. You want to make sure that you've got a good contract in place, and you also want to make sure that that contract has financial backing of some sort. And most IT vendors are, they're not asset rich, right? Their assets are their people or their intellectual property. So you probably want some insurance policy in place to verify things. You want provisions to destroy that information. I often tell this story, but we had a payroll provider that had worked with one of our clients 9 years prior. They had a breach, and our client's information was still within their system. So our client's employees were impacted by that payroll provider holding on to that information for that long. So make sure there's a provision within the contract that they need to get rid of that information. And then just one other thought is where does that information stay? That should be built into the contract too. It's a lot easier to claw back information if it's in, the United States of America or a territory than if it's in, I'm not going to pick on any jurisdiction, but let's say Gibraltar or something like that, where they've outsourced it and it's in the cloud, and we've got different legal jurisdictions, and you have to claw that information back. So just things to think about as you're building out a contract can protect your information greatly.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'll just touch on real quick incident response plans. If there's two things to bring out of this in terms of safeguarding your network, your systems, your environment, is employee awareness training, as Dan alluded to, and incident response planning, just the preparation. who's going to be a part of that incident response plan. Certainly your roles as safety professionals, if you are wearing multiple hats, certainly you think about physical security, that could be an area that could bring your folks and your expertise into this process as well. How do you communicate that? Assessing the scope, knowing if you need to bring in law enforcement, working with those government regulations. These are all key elements. HR function as well, public relations. Again, we can't express this enough. Here's a couple visuals, this slide and the following, just to say all the stakeholders that are at the table when we go through this type of assessment of the organization, and if sensitive information has been exposed, making sure that, you know, this is not just an IT issue, but it certainly is, you know, the risk managers, a CFO, for example, the insurance buyer, may be looking to just control the overall cost, while IT is also trying to do their work on their end. They may perceive a ransomware event as, you know, a slap against their own day-to-day work. It shouldn't be perceived that, as Dan mentioned, there's not 100% security. That's just false. So the understanding of being responsive and understanding all the stakeholders that need to be at the table when an incident arises, and practicing that, running some mock simulations, some tabletop exercises to see who's going to respond to what in different scenarios. So again, just can't stress that enough. And again, here's another visual to say, you know, it's more than just those internal stakeholders. You're going to have those third-party suppliers. It could affect supply chain. It could, you know, from a vendor standpoint, from a creditor standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot of different spread that we've seen with different organizations, and regardless of size, if you're working with some of those bigger clients, they could be impacted. That could certainly cause some type of business interruption on your end. And so just to be mindful of that. So we'll move forward here and hand it over to Dan.
Yeah, and just quickly, I think Mario and I both hit on this, but I think that, you know, if there's two takeaways, one, awareness training for your employees, and second is some sort of incident response plan. These things, you know, I say this all the time, but they don't occur on Tuesday morning when, you know, an organization is sitting around at their leadership meeting, or Monday morning, or whatever your leadership meeting is. They typically happen, and this is by design, you know, Friday night before a long weekend, Christmas Eve, you know, when your leadership team is probably most distracted, maybe a big M&A is going on, something like that, and when there's opportunity for, you know, maybe the communication's not at its peak point. So we see cyber events happen every day, and we see a lot of these things that never make the paper. I guarantee if everyone on this call scanned the paper this morning, there's going to be a cyber event that's in the paper. There's probably going to be 2 or 3. And you know, those are mishandling. They're probably mishandled if they've made the paper, or they're just so huge that it's going to make a headline. But so don't, you know, mishandling the breach is the concern. And just the next slide here is going to kind of go through. There's just so many steps in a cyber event. If you have an auto accident, you know, property only, you know, you're going to go in, everyone's going to know what's going to happen. There's going to be a way to value that. There's going to be a deductible. It's going to be pretty, you know, we all know we're going to go to the, you know, how we're going to go get that fixed. We know the body shop. It's all good. When we have a cyber event, there's a lot of things that have to go into it. First is, how do we figure this thing out? What happened? You know, what happened to whom and over what time period? And then the second thing you have to understand is that how do you need to respond? What happened? What happened to these individuals? And then what is our obligation? You may or may not be familiar, but there's 48 or 49 different state laws. Mario mentioned GDPR, we mentioned CCPA. There's all these different laws on how you need to react to an event. And those are all governed by the state of domicile of the individual impacted. I shouldn't say all, but most are impacted by the state of domicile of the individual impacted. So let's say you're a gas station in Fargo. You've probably had people rolling through your gas station from at least 48 states in the last year, right? If you have an issue, you've got to track all those individuals down. If you're a school, it's not the student that went into school at Fargo, it's where the student is today. So let's say they've gone, we've got students on the East Coast, we have students on the West Coast, we have students in Europe, we have students all over the place. You need to provide them the information that you've lost their data, and this is what we're going to do for you. There's a lot of things to think about. So you got forensics, you got legal, you've got probably public relations, you probably have some sort of notification firm, you might want to provide credit monitoring. All these different tools are out there. So you don't just call the body shop, you have to get all these people lined up. So those are the things to think about as you're thinking about your disaster recovery plan. What are we going to do? And then also you want to get back to normal too, right? That auto accident, you're probably going to either get rid of that employee, or you're going to tell them to, stop drinking on the job. I'm making things up, but there's going to be probably a pretty easy solution there, right? With the cyber event, you got to figure out, how do we stop this from happening again? What do we do? What forensically can we do? How do we get this data back? There's just a lot of tools you need to bring back in to protect the organization. So those are the things that we recommend you do in advance of an event versus after the event happens.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'll just touch on it with the appreciation that not everybody here is handling cyber insurance or insurance portfolios. But sometimes there's this misnomer that, perhaps we already have some cyber insurance coverage under our general liability policy or property policy that you all may have some familiarity with, or work comp or some other tie-ins there. The reality is that a lot of those traditional insurance policies have put absolute exclusions on their policies to not pick up the types of losses that we're seeing now. And this is a very colorful slide, but it goes to show you that a lot of these traditional policies are not picking up some of the material threats and perils that we just covered. So again, feel free to share this information with some of the insurance buyers on your end or a CFO, just so that they're well aware of it and not blindsided by a cyber incident, thinking that perhaps their GL policy, general liability policy, or a kidnap, ransom, and extortion policy is going to be their be-all, end-all for responding, because oftentimes it is not. And again, this is just a broad overview of what some of the components of first-party coverage, first-party coverage, and third-party coverages that's covered under cyber insurance policies around the circle of what type of loss and damages can be covered. So again, I want to be cognizant of time and your roles within your organizations, but certainly we can spend hours on this. Dan and I have doing deep dives into the specific coverage language. And again, this is a busy slide here, but I'll let Dan touch on some of the first few thoughts here, but we're not going to spend too much time on this one either.
Yeah, just very quickly, these policies are not all created equal. And so there's a lot of different coverages that you can input depending on the type of risk of the organization, what might be out there, coverage for, things like bricking. How do we cover the laptops that have been essentially rendered as bricks because of a malware event, those type of things. So there's all kinds of tools to tweak within a policy. I think one question people might have from a risk management standpoint is, what's the cost? This market is actually fairly soft yet because of there's just so many market entrants here. It's a growing line of insurance. Insurance companies want to grow, so there's a lot of market pressure to keep the price down right now, and I think a lot of ability to get broader coverage into the policy. We're starting to see that change a little bit, but relative to the rest of the insurance industry, it's a good time to buy cyber insurance.
Yep. And I'll just add one quick thing for the folks that are concerned about, a bodily injury property loss stemming from a security failure. What if a industrial control system overheats because it's been impacted by some malware? We have seen those types of losses. Property policies are pushing back to say, we don't want to cover that type of an event. And cyber policies are saying, look, well, we're not made to do that just yet. There's some smaller sublimits available for that. So just be cognizant of that as to where there could be an overheated system, for example, that could cause some type of bodily injury, property damage, not only from a first party standpoint for your own employees, but for third parties as well. So again, that's another seminar in and of itself, but being conscious of the coordination what we call silent, non-affirmative cyber, and the coordination with those property policies is key. And then finally, we'd be remiss to not touch upon some additional services that can be purchased either through cyber insurance carrier or through your agent or broker. But again, a lot of times these cyber insurance policies will offer complimentary employee awareness training, some endpoint detection, vulnerability scans, what have you, some modeling, benchmarks, analytics to go through and understand what your true exposure is and address coverage for that. And again, to the point about bodily injury and property damage, I can't stress that enough. That is a hot topic in our space. And again, I think that's where your influence within organizations to the CFO, to your insurance buyer, to overall executives can kind of push that to say, hey, this is a concern. And that's where that you're kind of building that muscle memory, the culture of understanding how a security risk could translate into bodily injury, property damage, yet alone just the financial injury from a ransomware event, which again, oftentimes gets pushed onto the CIO or the IT folks to address. So again, it's a holistic approach within the organization. And with that, we will open it up to some Q&A. I know we're kind of getting pressed on time. And I'll just add, if there's any questions, feel free to certainly reach out to Dan or myself. You have our contact information there. But Dan, was there anything in the chat or questions that came up?
I think there was a question on whether this is going to be published again. I think it's been answered. I will say that, Carrie or Chuck, feel free to use these slides or pass them out to your group if that would be helpful to anyone. But yeah, any other questions?
All right.
Okay. Thank you for your time today. And if there's any questions that come up afterwards, our contact information is below there. So.
Great.
Dan and Mario, thank you so much. This was very interesting. Just a quick question. What are the approximate costs of some of these policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can touch on that real quick too. The cost is dictated based off of industry class, revenue, and some security controls. The underwriting process has gotten really streamlined. For a standalone cyber policy that's comprehensive, covering a lot of the recommended coverages that we touched on, we're seeing that under $1,000 in the $700 range for the smallest types of organizations. And then, on up from there. So it's not a huge spend, relatively speaking, especially when it comes to other cyber security investments that could occur, especially under COVID, which may be more difficult to implement and more costly to implement. So this can be a relatively smaller expense from that standpoint. I'm not sure, Dan, if you have any other comments on that.
No, I don't think, I meant to mention this earlier, maybe just a stat I'll give you, and I don't know if it's quite on point, but I saw recently where, more value is intangible now, meaning it's a cyber exposure versus tangible for organizations, but yet 95% of the insurance spend is still on the tangible and not on the intangible, meaning intellectual property, cyber, whatever it may be. So, it's a great question because I think people are very, and I'm biased, but misdirecting some of their in their spend to things that maybe are a little bit old school because they're not thinking about the holistic risk of the organization.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Check the chat here one more time. All right. Well, again, thank you to our presenters, Dan and Mario. It was good information, very interesting. Times are changing all the time, and it's good to have this information so that we can keep on top of things when they come up. Membership, thank you for joining us today. And you should have all received or will be receiving an email with a link in that email that will take you to a questionnaire or a survey. Please fill that information in and return it back to us. We use that information to bring additional meetings like this to you based on what you, our membership, want to see. So that's a very, very useful information for us. So Thank you. Everybody have a great day. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you again next month.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Appreciate it. Take care.